Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about Uncharmed by Lucy Jane Wood. I read Rewitched by this author pretty much this time last year and just found it so lovely and magical and just the perfect read for Halloween, as well as being incredibly relatable. This book is set in the same world, which is our world, but with a bit of a magical twist where there are witches and warlocks living in a secret society who come into their powers at 15 years old and then spend the next 15 years training themselves up, working out their magical personality, and then at the age of 30 they then have to prove their magic, prove their worth in a magical trial. And this was the premise of Rewitched, that our lead character in that was discovering about this trial, it completely throwing her almost losing her powers, and then having to spend the next month building up her magical knowledge in order to hopefully keep her powers intact. In Uncharmed we are meeting Annie Wildwood, who is in her early 30s, so she's already undergone this trial and succeeded, and now is a member of Selkirk Coven. Annie is based in London and she owns a successful bakery called Celestial Bakehouse and is just the ultimate perfectionist and lives what looks from the outside to be this rather charmed life of beauty, fashion and baked goods. She always knows what to wear, she always knows the perfect thing to say to put people at ease, and just looks perfect. Or at the very least she always knows what to do, say, look like, wear for the non-magical people in her life. And we see that it is noticeably harder for her to impress the witchy people in her life. Annie's witchy friends are basically quintessential mean girls, people that she tries very desperately to please and can never quite live up to their standards. And it is clear to the reader, if not to Annie, that they don't have her best interests at heart. But Annie just isn't conscious of this at the time, and because we find out that there is some family scandal in her past, her father having brought shame upon the Wildwood name, Annie is constantly feeling like she needs to prove herself to Selkirk, and that by being perfect she might be able to clear up her family's reputation. It's clear that beneath the veneer that Annie puts on, that her people-pleasing perfectionist ways are not completely fulfilling and are taking a toll on her in more ways than just one. However, when Selkirk call upon Annie to assist them in the mentoring and protection of a teenage girl called Maeve, Annie simply can't say no. But I tell you, if anything is going to uproot your perfectly manicured life, then surely it will be the arrival of a teenage girl who is incredibly unimpressed with you. Oh, and did I mention that Maeve has these newly acquired magical powers that are abnormally powerful, uncontrolled and causing absolute havoc? Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a recipe for disaster for Annie. Just a little side note, the first chapters with Annie meeting Maeve just seemed so very much like when Barbie from the Barbie movie meets Sasha for the first time. Just the level at which Maeve is not impressed. Though I suppose Maeve is a little bit more receptive. She doesn't go around calling Annie a fascist. Annie and Maeve are secreted away by Selkirk to a cottage in the woods, to a place that is magically protected and no one should find them, where Annie is tasked to train up Maeve and learn more about her powers. However, before long they've discovered that this secret unoccupied cottage actually is occupied by Hal, a gruff animal-loving warlock who is rather ticked off at the fact that Selkirk have just offered his house out to strangers without his permission, but he does begrudgingly allow the two of them to stay. As Annie, Maeve and Hal spend more time together, there is this real found family emerging. Annie is developing a real kinship and care over Maeve, potentially a romance with Hal, that is making her reconsider her perfectionist ways and making her discover what life is really like when you find people who love you unconditionally, allowing her to embrace imperfection and also force her to consider what she is willing to sacrifice in order to keep her little family unit safe, especially when outside forces threaten their way in. Like Rewitched, I feel like the cover and the general marketing towards this book make it appear like this is a real cozy cottagecore fantasy, but like Rewitched, it really doesn't let on quite how stressful this book can be. It certainly doesn't let on the more emotional aspects of this story, which are very real and at times feel quite intense. I really enjoyed the commentary in this book on the pressures and dangers of perfectionism and people-pleasing. I feel like a lot of people are going to find this book quite relatable, even with the magical influence thrown in. And I really like how Lucy Jane Wood carefully builds up the realization that Annie's life is not quite so charmed as it appears. The first chapter of this book really builds up this lovely version of what Annie's perfectionist tendencies create in the non-witchy world. Happy customers, a lovely environment, people having their days made just by her words and by the baked goods that she creates. However, as the day goes on and we follow Annie more, this perfect veneer does start to crack, and we see how stressful it is for her, how she craves time alone, how she's becoming more and more isolated, and it is emotionally exhausting for her. We also discover that Annie's perfectionism manifests itself as an actual spell that she has to conduct every single day. At first, her life sounds ideal, and in this first chapter you can get yourself to a point where you almost wish such a thing was real for yourself so you could see what the perfect version of you would be. Kind of reminds me of when the first Twilight films came out, and I remember having conversations with my friends about what the vampire version of me would look like. because that is meant to be you, but a perfect version, a filtered version. But before we start to covet that spell too much, we find out that there is a real physical and mental toll that this perfection spell takes on its caster, and you quickly realise that you wouldn't want this for yourself at all. And it feels so visceral how drained Annie is by this constant need to be perfect and to please people. And also, you can viscerally feel the relief that she has when she is around people who she doesn't really need to be perfect around. This book is really about who your real friends and family are, and it's people who will accept you for all your little imperfections, who won't try to manipulate you or change you. Maybe they might push you down a better path to be the best version of yourself, the kindest version of yourself, but they would never try and twist you into something that you're not. I think the strength of Lucy Jane Wood's writing is in her characters and the relationships. The banter is always really good fun, and I would say in comparison to Rewitched, there's really been a progression in her ability to pace a book. I remember with Rewitched finding it took around about 100 pages to get really into the plot, whereas in this I feel like it is much sharper. You get into the concept and these characters very quickly. However, I don't think this is a perfect book, and you know, like the major themes, it doesn't have to be. But one thing I will say is that as great as the protagonist and the people who she considers friends are written, I do feel like Lucy Jane Wood struggles with writing more villainous characters who often just seem quite one-dimensional, to the point that it's quite ridiculous how long it takes into the book for Annie to realise that these are bad people, because it's so clear straight away. And I feel like often with Mean Girls, especially of the kind that she's writing, I think lull you into more of a false sense of security, and you don't realise quite how bad they are for you until you're a little bit deeper in, whereas it felt so clear from the get-go that these were not good people. As a result, there is no glamour or draw to them that I just don't believe that Annie, as she is written, would want to impress these people. I also feel like the climax scenes, the more action-based scenes in this book and in Rewitched, could be worked on. It feels like we spend quite a bit of time building up these characters, building up the tension, and then things get resolved within about a chapter or so, and not always in the clearest way. So I think that is definitely something that could be improved. But I had a really great time with this book. I might potentially say that I preferred this to Rewitched. There's not very much in it. I enjoyed both of Lucy Jane Wood's books, and I would definitely pick up the next one. I think if you are looking for something this spooky season that is going to feel quite relatable, is going to have its cozy moments, but also might slap you across the face with some of its relatability and emotional themes, then this book would definitely be for you. I had a great time with it. So there we go. Those are all of my thoughts about Uncharmed by Lucy Jane Wood. Do let me know if you've read this book. Alternatively, please let me know about any similar books that you're reading for Halloween. Anything that has that combination of spooky, magical, cozy. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.